There are 2 or 3 things that I want to point out to you about MLA format with regard to quotations specifically. So we're going to look at those. In the section MLA 2A, it talks about citing quotations and borrowed ideas. Here's why you cite. You tell the reader where the information comes from so that they can verify it or go to that original source. And secondly, you give credit to the writers from whom you have borrowed. So those are the 2 reasons that we cite information, that we borrow from other sources. These are the things that MLA, the Modern Language Association, recommends that we do when we cite text, that is, when we indicate that we have borrowed. First of all, the source is introduced by a signal phrase that names the author. According to George, Mary asserts, but we use both first and last name the first time, and then we use last name when we refer to the author later. The material is followed by the page number in parenthesis. If you are using a source that doesn't have page numbers, there are some alternate ways that you can deal with that. You can use paragraph numbers, but as a general rule, when you are citing a text that is paginated, that is, it has page numbers, you want to include the page number. Of course, if it is a poem or a play, there are other things that we do. We use line numbers, act, scene, and line in order to indicate where specifically the information came from. And then the third thing is that at the end of the paper, we have a list of the works cited. Now notice what this is. We cite it in the text, and so we have a list of those things that we used in the text. Notice how it is arranged. It is in alphabetical order by the author's last name. If there's no author, you go to the next word in the citation, and if that next word is a, an, or the, you move on to the next word. It is alphabetized by the author's last names. So here's what it looks like. Legal scholar J. Kassan points out we have his name, we're introducing him, we're using a verb, and then we tell what we use the information we borrowed from him, even if it's a paraphrase. Even if we're borrowing the idea but not the exact words, we credit the source by using a page number in the text, an in-text citation, and then we have a work cited. Notice the format for the work cited. It says it varies for different types of sources. Here we know that it is a journal. The title of the journal is italicized. This is the format for the volume and issue number. Then it tells you the year, the page numbers, and that this was a print source rather than coming from a database or being an electronic source. Author's name in verse order, last name, first name. If there are 2 or more authors, the rest are in regular order. And then you have the title of the article in quotation marks. Title of the journal, the large piece, is italicized. We tell whether it is print or a web source. When we borrow information, whether it is a person's ideas or their exact words, we credit it in 2 ways. One, we introduce one in text. We tell who it is, and we tell where it came from in the text. Then we have a list at the end that tells specifically the source from which we borrowed. MLA 2B reminds you that if you're borrowing actual words, you enclose it in quotation marks. Notice that they have the original source. If we use Frederick Lane's words, we should enclose them in quotation marks. And then at the end of the sentence, we put the page number. If you borrow and you do not put it in quotation marks, that is plagiarism, and that's considered to be academic cheating. One option that you have is to summarize or paraphrase. That is, you can put in a very few words what the original text says. But again, the point is that you credit your original source. So if we have an original source, then we want to, and we use exact words, we should enclose those in quotation marks. But if we paraphrase, we still introduce the author, provide the information, and then the page number. The signal phrase indicates, here is information that I've borrowed from. Page number indicates that we have come to the end of that borrowed material. Whenever we borrow material, we should introduce the point. We use source material to support the point, and then we explain to the reader how that particular support relates to our ideas. Section MLA 3 discusses integrating sources, and it talks about how to use quotations appropriately. That is, we use them for specific reasons. Notice what the specific reasons are. When the language is vivid or expressive, when it is needed for technical accuracy, when you need to let the original explain in his or her own words, the author's, that is, allow the author of the original to explain in his or her own words. When the words of an authority lend weight, you quote the authority. And when the language is the source of the topic of discussion, like in a literary analysis. You use exact language for specific purposes. When the author says it so well, you can't say it better. When it is needed for technical accuracy. When you're letting the original source speak for themselves. When you are adding weight to your argument through the use of an authority. And finally, when it is the topic of your discussion. There are two ways that you can incorporate without using the entire thing. That is, the entire piece of information. You can use ellipsis points, which indicate that something has been left out, and you can use brackets so that you can make your sentence grammatically correct, but still use the original wording or the original source. Again, the idea is that you enclose in quotation marks exact words, and that you credit the original by introducing and by providing page numbers. If it is a particularly long quotation, which we use seldom, then we have a different format. Notice here that you have a colon. It is indented further. Notice that there are no quotation marks. The period is then followed by that parenthetical. Notice that that's a little different. MLA 3B discusses using signal phrases. We already talked briefly about the fact that the signal phrase marks the boundary. It lets your reader know that borrowed material is being used. The signal phrase establishes authority. That is, we know who the person is. Here, you don't know what his credentials are. Here you do. Make sure that you introduce the source in such a way that your reader knows why you're using that particular source. And finally, we talk about introducing summaries and paraphrases. It's not, you're not using the exact words, but the signal phrase again serves to mark the boundary. We use it to integrate statistics and other facts, and we can also use source material so that it puts things in context. That is, so that we explain. Signal phrases are important. They do several things. One, they mark boundaries. 2, they establish authority. And 3, they introduce summaries and phrases and serve to mark boundaries as there as well. Make sure you use appropriate verbs when you're introducing your source material. One last point about documenting sources, and we'll talk more about this later, but notice what we're supposed to do when we document sources. We have an in-text citation, we have an entry at the end. We do have some basic rules. One, we name the author in the signal phrase. It's followed by the parenthetical citation with the page number. Once we have introduced a source, then we may refer to the source by last name, using the citation at the end. Sometimes if we have already introduced the author, then we may not return to the signal phrase. We've already marked boundaries. We've already introduced them as an authority. In that case, if that source has already been introduced and we simply want to use it again, we can use the author's last name and the page number in the parenthetical when there's not an author's name in a signal phrase. If we don't know who the author is, which is sometimes the case, we have an unnamed author, then we use the title of the article in the parenthesis. And of course, that would be, we would include a page number if that was appropriate. If we have an unknown page number, that is, there is no page number, then we can use just the author's name. If it says that if it's a one-page source, it says you may omit the page number, but it's still a good idea to include it even if it's only one page long. If you have more than one author, you include them. You include up to 3. With 4, you can use et al. With 4, you can use et al. In conjunction with the first name. That is the author's first name and then et al. Meaning and others. Finally, if you have an organization as an author, you can use that in your signal phrase as well. When we talk about MLA papers, there are certainly standards, but most of the time we talk about the rules that apply, such as whether or not we spell numbers or we use numerals, how we integrate and document sources, and how our paper looks when we turn it in. So make sure when you're integrating sources that you observe these rules. Sometimes students inadvertently plagiarize because they don't know how to apply the rules. But if you submit work that is not your own, that's a major error and one that will result in a 0 for an assignment. If you're making a good faith effort to use the rules, the documentation rules for MLA that MLA prescribes, then I give you the benefit of the doubt and allow you to make corrections. If you don't have a writer's reference, these rules are standard and you can find them at the OWL at Purdue, the online writing lab at Purdue University. You can do a search for MLA with the specific information you need, and then obviously you can always ask. Notice that these are rules that allow you to credit your sources. And how do you do that? Really pretty simple. You want to include borrowed material in quotation marks if it is the exact words. You want to introduce the author and their credentials, and you want to put the page number at the end of the quoted material, and finally you're going to have a list of works cited. So if you are documenting your sources in this way, then you are avoiding plagiarism, because that's all you have to do. Credit your original source and let your reader know where the information comes from.